and we want to invite you to share how you would help make Homes Guarantee a priority in your administration.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, and thank you for mobilizing in the name of our values. I'm running for president because I'm worried that our country is running out of time, and that we are in a crisis such that even now we are probably underreacting to the situation that we're facing, because it's about even more than the national emergency that Donald Trump represents. And don't get me wrong, that's a national emergency. But I also don't think somebody like that could have gotten within cheating distance of the Oval Office in the first place unless we had more serious problems in this country. And that's why there's no such thing as going back to normal and thinking that's going to serve us well. We craft a new normal and make sure that it is better than anything we've lived with today. Now, as a mayor, housing is one of the issues that we work on the most. And the reality is housing challenges are different in every community. But what we know is that we need to ensure that more housing is built to begin with, especially in our wealthiest cities where people have been priced out of the ability to live in their neighborhoods. We also need to make sure that those who have been systematically excluded, often in racialized fashion and often as a consequence of intentional federal policy, receive justice. And it's why, as part of my Douglas plan for tackling systemic racism in America, I would have us create a 21st century response to the Homestead Act that empowers people to live in the very neighborhoods that they were redlined into and are now being gentrified out of. We also need to recognize that there are more issues than just the number of houses being built that determine housing affordability. In a community like mine, you can get a pretty good house for $30,000 or $40,000. Many folks can't afford that in a way that I think has been called a housing problem, but ought to be treated as an income problem. And it's why it is so important that we raise the minimum wage, empower workers, and make it possible to live well for anybody who's working.
Thank you. For our first question, we have Dawson Davenport and Sherry Mortiz. They'll ask a question about clean water, family farms, and the environment.
As a young kid growing up here in central Iowa on the Meskwaki settlement, during the hot summer months, me and my cousins would ride our bike down to the Iowa River. As I got older, I noticed more and more changes in the landscape, the water, the fish, and I started to pay attention to them. And I noticed more and more do not swim notices being issued. It's scary to think that I will not be able to teach my children about the river and that the youth may not know what clean water is. My tribe has taken measures to ensure us not only a seat at the table in the fight for clean water, but we are working to partner with others to ensure and address the water crisis together by creating water quality standards for my tribe's water bodies. These standards will not only set quality goals for our nation, but set the tone across the state. A state that has over 750 impaired water bodies and counting because of industrial agricultural practices, and specifically the factory farm industry. We must build relationships with everyone to ensure clean water in the state and change the idea of what agriculture has to look like. Indigenous people are doing our part. Now it's time for the government and corporations to do theirs, so that my children and the indigenous native youth can ride down to their rivers and enjoy clean water.
Mayor Buttigieg, you've just heard,
You're good?
you've just heard a very powerful story, one that could be repeated hundreds of times across this state. In short, we have too many factory farms, we have too much manure, and we have 750 polluted water bodies. That is why Des Moines Water Works has the largest nitrate filtering system in the world, and it's why we are a major contributor to the pollution in the Gulf Coast. My question for you is, will you support mandatory rules and regulations on industrial ag, including a moratorium on any new or the expansion of existing sites?
So thank you. First of all, I want to thank the tribal leadership that is helping lead the way on this, because there is a moral urgency that is at the heart of this question, that is not only a question of science, but a question of justice. The PeteButtigieg Band of Potawatomi Indians, which is the largest tribe in our area, often speaks about 7 generations, and making decisions that will affect future generations is at the heart of the idea of this campaign. Environmental justice is a leading example, and we need to make sure that agriculture is sustainable. There are several reasons why right now it is not. Many of them have to do with the corporate structures that dominate the way that agriculture takes place in this country. It's one of the reasons why my plan for rural America includes doing something about the monopolies that have led to more and more concentration that is squeezing farmers and worsening the economic and environmental reality for farms. Now, we also need to, in addition to dealing with the economic structures that farmers work within, do something about water quality regulation itself. And when this president rolls back water quality regulation, it moves this country in the wrong direction and harms not only future generations, but people living right now. People living in communities like mine, a river city that has an immediate stake in what is happening with, for example, the nitrates that go into water. Now, we actually have what is called a conservation stewardship program and an environmental quality incentives program in the Department of Agriculture, but they need to be massively expanded and better funded in order to make it possible for a farmer to farm more sustainably. Right now, I've talked to farmers in Iowa who, under the current conditions, with monopolies and monopsonies, squeezing them both in where they get their supplies and where they sell their goods, they have a choice to either continue farming the way that they do or go out of business. That should not be the choice laid at their feet. And if under this president we can find billions of dollars to incentivize, to basically make up for the damage being done by our trade war, then surely we can find the funding to not only encourage or require, but compensate farmers to make sure that they can do so in a more sustainable way. And coming to the dimension about these factory farms, I also think that that allows us to practice what we preach when we are creating more rigorous standards that require that farming take place in a way that is responsible downstream in environmental as well as economic fashion.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a follow-up question.
Mayor Pete, with all due respect, clean water is a human right. We have people in rural America right now in the state of Iowa that are drinking contaminated water out of their wells and they don't even know it. We need a moratorium now, and I'd like to know, what is your benchmark? We have 750 polluted water bodies right now. What would be your benchmark that would trigger you to enact a moratorium now? Would it be 800, 900, 1,000 polluted water bodies?
So it's too many right now. It's already too many.
Exactly.
So what we need to do is we should revisit the master matrix that decides what is allowable. And as you know, a lot of this happens at the state level, but we can harmonize it to a federal standard. And again, we need to make sure that we're providing the funding to actually get this done. Otherwise, it's empty words.
Thank you. Bree Moss and Samina Mustafa have a question about Medicare for all.
Hello, my name is Brianna Moss. I am a proud CCI Action member and Democratic Socialist from Dubuque, Iowa. And I use she, her pronouns. At the age of 12, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And growing up with my single mother in Dyersville, finances were a frequent obstacle. I remember my mother's coworkers pooling their money together so that we could afford the co-payment for my first insulin pump. And then I remember every year having to switch back to injections because syringes are cheaper than pump supplies. I remember getting married because I needed health insurance, and I remember later escaping that abusive marriage only thanks to Obamacare. But then I turned 26, and I was no longer eligible for my mother's health insurance plan. And during that time, I went several months without coverage. Luckily, I had been rationing my supplies, and so I was able to make it through those scary weeks. I have many type 1 diabetic friends, and it frightens me to know that they've done everything right in life, and they still can't see their doctor regularly. They still cannot get their prescriptions every month because of cost. Many diabetics are even dying, such as my neighbor Jesse, who passed away at the age of 32, because like me, he was rationing his insulin. Even with my partner's new job with a union, his copays are so high that we're better off not getting married so that I can stay on Iowa Medicaid and stay stuck between a rock and a hard place, basically. So I'm sick and tired of seeing my fellow type 1 diabetics dying, and I'm sick and tired of fighting with health insurance companies. Enough is enough, and it's time that we, the people, call the shots.
My name is Samina Mustafa. I'm a member of Jane Addams Seniors in Action from Chicago, Illinois. Mayor Buttigieg, you've said that competition can create a glide path to universal coverage. With almost 30 million without health care, with over 40 million who are underinsured, with most Americans that cannot afford a $400 emergency cost, how are you going to help folks like Bree and prevent deaths like Jesse's as president?
Well, thank you. We have accepted the unacceptable for far too long in this country. You should never have to ration needed medical supplies in order to get by. It is completely unacceptable, as is people dying because of inadequate medical care. We are the only developed country in the world that tolerates this. So what I propose is that we create a public alternative, one that everybody can afford, one that is backed with the subsidies that are required to make sure that income is not a barrier to cost, one that caps out-of-pocket costs and makes sure that 8.5% of income is the maximum that you pay. Now, as a progressive, I believe that public alternative will be better than any of the private ones. But instead of commanding people to take my alternative, I'm going to let people decide. Because the moment that that alternative is there, everybody can access health care. Now, if for some reason, and union members are a good example, some folks don't prefer my public alternative, okay. It's not important to me in principle that your health care come from the government. It is important to me in principle that you get health care no matter what. I think the public alternative will be better, and everybody will opt into it over time. But, and right now, the insurance, you might have seen, the healthcare lobbyists put out a statement condemning my plan as too much government. But if they come up with something better, we'll see. I just don't think it's going to happen, and I trust you to make the decision.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a follow-up question. Can I just remind folks to please be respectful? Go ahead. So, go ahead. Go ahead. Hey, folks, can we allow our speaker to ask the follow-up question? Thank you.
I'm on your side, guys. A market-driven approach has meant that 45,000 people die a year without health care, that a $6 vial of insulin is being sold for $300. You know, as president, you will be commander-in-chief. Will you be the healer-in-chief?
Count on it.
Thank you.
I just told you. And look, not everybody will agree with me, but I think the public alternative will be better. I believe the public plan we create will be the best one. I just don't think we have to command you to take it, because if I'm right, you'll take it.
Thank you, Mayor. We're going to move to our next question. So please, let's welcome Kelvin Dunnigan and Viola Perry, who have a question about racial justice.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kelvin Dunnigan. I've been living in Des Moines for 36 years. But right now, as a black man, I feel hunted in my own community. Blacks are 11% population in Des Moines, but 23% tickets issued by the Des Moines police are issued to black men. The Des Moines City Council blocks the ban of racial profiling. I am racial profiled all the time. About 6 months ago, I was racial profiled. I was leaving my home to go get groceries, and I got stopped by a cop. So I politely asked the cop, "Sir, why are you pulling me over?" The cop replied, "Your license plate cover." I said, "Sir, there are thousands of license plate covers in Des Moines, that exact plate cover." The next thing the cop said was, "I smelled marijuana." I said, "Sir, that's impossible." I said, "I don't even smoke marijuana." So his next question was, "Can I search your car?" I said, "Sir, you got to have a reason to search my car." So I told him no. So the cop gave me my license back and told me I can leave. I felt humiliated, I felt anger, but most of all, I felt relief. Because even though the cop stopped me for no reason, I was only a block away from my home. I could have been jail time or even shot dead as being a black man. Your turn.
Viola. Viola Perry. I am a member of the racial justice team for ICCI, Des Moines, Iowa. Mayor, a South Bend white police officer shot and killed a black man in June. And your words to the grieving black community were, I quote, "I'm not asking for your vote." You're a mayor of a city of the size of Davenport, Iowa, and you have more control over your local police department than anyone. Given the epidemic of police killing black people, do you admit that you made a mistake in handling the shooting? And what would you do differently if you were president?
Thank you. First of all, you should never feel fear when you're interacting with a police officer. And you should absolutely not be treated differently because of your race. And we know that that is happening to people across the country. And there needs to be presidential as well as local leadership, which is why I support the move in Des Moines to ensure that racial profiling is specifically prohibited in this city. The shooting that you're talking about of Eric Logan by a white police officer has been a source of great pain in our community. Let me share what I did, and let me share what I've been thinking about since. The first thing is we recognized that there needed to be an outside investigation. So I called for there to be that outside special prosecutor, and that's taking place right now to make sure that we get the facts. The second thing was, and this is where I could have done things differently. Here's where I might have done something differently. I was very preoccupied with the specifics of the incident, which are still under dispute. The officer said he was attacked with a knife, but he did not activate his body camera. And so there's no way to have that kind of evidence. Mm-hmm. What I realized very quickly is this is about even more than the death that took place that night. This is about whether people in our community feel that they can trust those who are sworn to keep them safe. And it is about whether there will continue to be systematic disempowerment of black people in our community, not only in encounters with the criminal justice system, but when it comes to health and housing and economics. Every time we sit at the table to talk about one piece of it, we wind up talking about more and more of it. And if I were able to go back to the early conversations we were having in June, I would have seen it sooner. But what we're doing right now is inviting the entire community to the table to, for example, help re-examine and potentially rewrite the policies that decide the use of force for officers, how training and discipline take place. And we're making sure that everybody knows that they're entitled to be present whenever the civilian board that makes discipline decisions in our city holds its meetings. I also appreciate the chance to explain a quote that I think was taken out of context. I am, as a candidate, very much asking for everybody's vote, including and perhaps especially black voters. Now, I did have an interaction when we were at an event that was about the shooting, and a woman approached me. She was very upset. And she said something about voting, or we're not going to get her political support. And the thing on my mind was, I'm here as a mayor of the city trying to deal with the police issue, not as a candidate campaigning. And so my point is, I'm not asking for your vote right now. I'm not here to talk about votes. I'm not here to campaign. I'm here to talk about how we can make sure this community is safe for everybody. I will ask for her vote another time, but first I owe it to her to deal with the issues that led to those protests.
Thank you. We have a follow-up question.
Mayor, when you took office, you fired the black police chief and hired a white replacement. And 50% of your black officers declined. So as president, what would change?
A whole lot. First of all, when I took office, I reappointed a police chief who was black, largely because of his relationships in the community. A few months later, I demoted him because when he came under a criminal investigation, I did not find out from him, and it affected the trust between us. But there's no question that we've got a problem in our city and in a great many cities when it comes to the diversity of our police departments. And I've owned up to the fact that we've not solved it, and it's only gotten harder since Ferguson. Now, we have done recruiting events. We have a partnership with the high schools. We are reaching out in every way that we know to get a more diverse department. But the gulf is so deep right now that I don't think a lot of young black residents ever even picture themselves in uniform. And in the same way that we need more progressives in law seeking not only to become public defenders, but to become prosecutors, because there's so much power in that office. I also think we need people who are passionate about justice in policing to consider a career in law enforcement. As president, you will see a reinvigorated civil rights division, which both through enforcement and through partnership will ensure that police departments are doing right by all of their residents.
Thank you. Our next question is by Chris Simmons and Kieran Longstein, and it's about college for all.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, my name is Chris Simmons and I'm a proud member of Iowa Student Action. I'm also a proud queer working class student in Iowa. I'm from a small manufacturing town to the east of here called Newton, and when I was 18, I was excited to go to college. But that didn't happen that year, because that year I was kicked out and I was cut off from my family. I was an 18-year-old with no money, no phone, and no real home, but I still had a dream of going to college at Iowa State. The next 2 years, I spent working 40 hours a week at a call center while also going to community college, which was still barely affordable. I woke up every day knowing that the people I went to high school with, my friends, had gone on to college without me, the college that they chose. And that ain't right.
That ain't right.
I know something now. I know that I deserve an education just like they do. The reason I didn't get that education is because the corporations that run our colleges don't give a damn about me. The only thing they care about is the money they can get from me, and that ain't right.
That ain't right.
Education is a human right. I know that. And I know that one day we will win that. Because I know that everyone in this room has my back as well as I have theirs. And now I want to know if presidential candidates have my back too.
I'm Kieran, and I'm with Iowa Student Action. Stories like Chris's are terrible, but they are all too common. Decades of cuts to our public education system in the name of profits leaves people out. From 2001 to 2016, tuition at Iowa public universities increased by over 70%. 10%. The solution is simple. We need profits out of education. I'm asking you to be a leader in our generation. Will you support free college for all?
So I support debt-free college for anyone for whom cost would be a barrier. Working class, middle income, absolutely. Where I'm not as comfortable is subsidizing the children of billionaires to go to college, because I think they can contribute toward their own tuition. But there is no question, and a story like yours resonates with me, because Chasten, my husband, is a teacher. His family has been wonderfully accepting, but when he first came out, it wasn't so easy. And he had that experience, living in a car at one point while trying to attend classes and work at the same time. And we are paying the costs of that to this day. I never thought I'd be on a Forbes list, one of those Forbes rankings. I'm on one. They ranked all of the presidential candidates by net worth, and we're bringing up the rear because of the six-figure student debt that our household has. And far too many people don't even get that far because cost becomes a barrier to being able to succeed at all. That isn't right. It shouldn't happen. It's why I insist that we massively expand the Pell Grant program, and this time make it eligible for living expenses, not just tuition. And peg it to inflation so they don't have to go back to Congress every time. I believe we need to pressure states not to pass on so much of the cost of college to students, like what you're describing, because there also has to be an investment by the state in making this happen. I believe in a national service program that would be one of many ways that you can qualify for having your loans forgiven for public service. Now, there's a program on the books to do that now, but it's almost impossible to take advantage of. You have to never miss a payment for 10 years, and it only works on certain kind of loans. It doesn't even come close to what we could be doing to create ways to eliminate that kind of debt. And we have to enforce against for-profit colleges that have effectively turned the Department of Education into America's biggest predatory lender. And that is why not only would I reinstate the rules that were deleted by Betsy DeVos when it comes to holding for-profit colleges accountable for their outcomes, but when it comes to going even further to relieve student debt, the debt created by those kinds of colleges is the first place that I would go.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a follow-up question.
Mayor Pete, debt-free college isn't good enough. It won't help students like us get to college. Yes or no? Do you have our backs? Will you support free college for all?
Are you millionaires? No? Then I got your back. Because those who would face a barrier to the cost of college, anyone who would qualify for a Pell Grant, or middle-income students, I got you covered. I just don't believe we should prioritize paying for the very wealthiest in this country to go to college when they could be helping with their own tuition costs. That's just what I believe.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next question is from Kelly Osborne, and she has a question about unions for all.
All right.
Hello, my name is Kelly Osborne. I'm a 44-year-old cancer survivor. I also raised 2 teenagers and a 5-year-old grandson by myself. I make $8.25 an hour at McDonald's, and I've been doing that for over a year now. But I can hardly make ends meet. I can't pay my bills and put food on the table. Every day I have to make tough choices as to what I can afford. It's either milk or toilet paper, you know, tough choices. But that means that I choose to do something else. This summer, sorry about this, guys. This summer it was my air conditioning. I couldn't afford the extra $25 a month. So in a small apartment with windows painted shut, it was a really hot summer. My grandson, Ryden, has special medical needs. He is the biggest blessing to me, and I love raising him, but it's a struggle. Sorry.
There you go.
Oh, come on. On low pay, I can't afford transportation, so I rely on others to get riding to his appointments, to school, to grocery shop, to whatever. Coming together with low-wage workers that fight for 15 in a union, I finally have some hope. Hope that by joining together, we can make jobs better and give our kids a brighter future. I've met so many people across Iowa who work hard for billion-dollar companies like McDonald's, but struggle to live with any kind of dignity.
That ain't right.
This has to change, and it has to change now. Mayor Buttigieg, what would you do to make sure that McDonald's workers like me have a chance to join a union so that we can fight for things that we deserve, like fair pay, health care, and stability on the job?
This is why I have been proud to march in the streets with McDonald's workers demanding $15 minimum wage and access to a union. In this country, it should not be possible to work and to still be living on the edge of poverty or in poverty. You should never have to choose between milk and paper towels. You should never have to choose between health and well-being. You deserve better. And this is one of the reasons why we need to support unions in this country. Look, you start the clock the day I was born, and you will see America's economy growing tremendously. And you'll see half the country's income not even budge. That's the same decades that they were dismantling labor unions in this country. And that's not a coincidence. So I'm proposing that we double unionization in the country, including making it easier for fast food workers to be able to unionize.
Yes.
We got to expand how you can unionize. For example, right now, there is no meaningful penalty when companies interfere with union elections. There will be multi-million-dollar penalties on my watch to make sure that that can't happen. But we've also got to expand who can unionize. It's why I propose multi-employer bargaining, so that you could rally with fast food workers at other chains across the street and in the neighborhood, and together have more strength to be able to negotiate. And it's why I was proud to stand with gig workers in California, Uber and Lyft drivers striking for access to labor protections, because in my view, if you're doing work, even if they call it a gig, it's still a job, and even if they call you a contractor, you're still a worker and you deserve worker protections. And I don't want to miss the point that you've made. What you're talking about is not just income for you. You're talking about your ability to support your kids.
Yeah.
And you deserve a president, and you deserve a country that helps, not hurts you, in being able to raise your children and do right by them.
Exactly.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a follow-up question.
You know, Kelly, proud to stand with you. Mayor Pete, you know, I heard you had a pretty good labor plan, and we met in Kansas City. I remember when you came to town, and we had a little combo. Sly James was in the room, Mayor of Kansas City at the time. So, and you were very supportive of 15 in a union. And you know, everyone I think in this room agrees that all workers need a union, right? We know this. We know this. And before I go on, shout out to all the Iowa workers who were on strike today. The amount of courage that took. They can never get enough praise. And you know, I hear y'all from a lot of the candidates today about penalties and our need for a union and what they're going to do. And I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of my brother from the Honduras who challenged a candidate earlier. He was like, if you got the info, would you contact certain folks and talk to them? I want to know who's going to get in McDonald's ear and these corporations' ear and really get them to the table. Because a lot of candidates and people who are for unions tell us we need it, they support us, but they got to get on these corporations and these companies and help get them to the table. Now, we're doing the groundwork in the streets, are we not? We are giving you a platform as candidates to stand on. We will continue to do the work. We will strike. We will go to jail together. Am I lying? No. We will.
But what more can you do besides policy and legislation to get corporations like McDonald's to the table? You talk to us, can you talk to them, Pete? Mayor Pete?
I can talk to them, and I often do. For example, when it came to those gig workers, I know a lot of the folks, just because of the generation I come from, who are part of those companies, and they know where I stand. But the reality is, it's not just a matter of asking them. It's a matter of seeing to it that they have no choice. Their job is to make as much profit as they can. At least that's what they think their job is. And unless we have a political system that empowers workers, that makes sure that when they do get to the table, whoever's sitting across the table from them has power, that's what's actually going to change this. That's why unions are so important, and that's why it's so important that you have a president who stands with workers and knows what's at stake in making sure that anybody who works a good day's work gets a good day's pay and the kind of labor protections and benefits that you deserve.
Thank you so much, Mayor. For our final question and for your closing remarks, we have Kathleen Sudasavan from Demos Action, who has a question about democratic reforms.
Thank you. Hello. Is this working?
I see
you. There's no question that people of color are disproportionately excluded from our political system. We make up close to 40% of this country, and yet 90% of our elected officials are white. Our nation's shameful legacy of racism has created many opportunities for the exploitation and targeting of people of color, exemplified by the subprime lending crisis, mass incarceration, voter suppression laws, and big money in our politics. Money and power go hand in hand in our country. The wealthiest 10% are 90% white. And despite the fact that our democracy is based on the principle of one person, one vote, the Supreme Court says we can't limit the distorting influence of big money on our elected representatives. Big money that comes from a predominantly white donor class and corporate interests rather than from everyday people. Voter suppression also distorts our democracy. Strict photo ID laws, the elimination of same-day registration, polling place closures, and restrictions on absentee voting make it harder for millions of Americans to vote. Expansive voter purges based on flawed data or voter history remove millions of eligible voters from the rolls. And our mass incarceration system disenfranchises close to 6 million people, predominantly people of color, due to felony convictions. Many others lose their rights simply because they're behind bars awaiting trial during elections. We have given sanction under color of law to the politics of racism and exclusion, and it cannot continue. Given the multitude of ways America silences the voices and aspirations of people of color, what are 3 concrete steps you will commit to taking in the first year of your presidency to get us to a truly inclusive democracy?
Thank you. This just might be the most important question of all, because everything else we've talked about, a question about housing, about policing, about debt, about wages and work, is fundamentally a question about power. And in this country, power depends on who can impact elections. The current system, the role of money, the way the districts are drawn, and racially motivated voter suppression make this less than a democracy. This is not a democracy when districts can be drawn to where politicians are picking out their voters instead of the other way around. It's definitely not a democracy when some U.S. citizens don't have a voice at all. Do you realize that the District of Columbia would be the most African-American state in the Union if it were a state? But it's not, and they have no meaningful voice in Congress. It's not right. I would go as far as to say, in a democracy, we should pick our president by just counting all of the votes and giving it to the person who got the most. So what can you expect from me? You can expect a 21st Century Voting Rights Act that makes sure that you cannot be denied the right to vote, that it is easier to register and to exercise that right, with Election Day as a federal holiday, with automatic voter registration, with vote by mail, with restoration of voting rights for the formerly incarcerated, and other steps to ensure that nobody is prevented. Count on that. Count on making sure that there is political representation for the U.S. citizens of the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, and that we move to deliver a national popular vote. And one more thing. If the Supreme Court, I don't agree with them, but if it really is the case that the Constitution says that we can't regulate campaign finance donations, that a corporation has the same political soul as a human being, because the Citizens United, if that really is true, time for a constitutional amendment to clear that up, and we should not be afraid to fight for one.
Thank you so much. Let's thank Mayor PeteButtigieg for joining us today. Thank you so much, Mayor.